Welcome to the Superstar Communicator podcast. My name is Susan Heaton-Wright, a leading impact, speaking and communications expert. My aim is to show you how to make an impact so you will be heard, listened to and respected for career success. Listen weekly to the podcast and go to our website, superstarcommunicator.com. Hello everybody, this is Susan Heaton-Wright. Do you know there is such a power of this podcast that I am now getting people contact me to introduce international people that are absolute experts at what they do within communication. And on the other end of the internet today, we have one such person. I'm absolutely thrilled to have him. He's called Fred Dust. He was a senior partner and global managing director at international design firm IDEO, a leading voice and practitioner of human-centered design and networking innovation. He helps organizations in media, finance, retail, and health confront disruption stemming from shifts in consumer behavior, social trends, economic pressures, and new technology. Prior to IDEO, Dust worked as an architect and spent 8 years working with independent artists and major art organizations. He chairs the board of Parsons and sits on the board of New School NPR and the Sundance Institute. He's written for Fast Company and has been interviewed by the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, CBS Sunday Morning, and Superstar Communicator podcast. He lives in New York City. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And the one thing I should actually, Alex, I think it'd be interesting for you to know is I'm also running a lot of the global conversations that the Rockefeller Foundation is doing right now. So there's some interesting stories I could tell you about what's going on.
Oh, please do. The more the better.
Yeah, so and I'm delighted to be on this show. Like, forget like New York Times and all that stuff. This is like this is my alley.
Thank you. This is the thing with the Superstar Communicator. It's all about different conversations.
Right.
And Fred, you have written this amazing book that has come from the USA, from your PR agent, called Making Conversation. So can you understand, listeners, why I'm so excited to have Fred on?
I was delighted when this got booked. I was like, bring it, I can't wait. So
so tell us about why you wrote this book.
Yeah, and maybe I'll even go back a little bit moment and just sort of say, like, just in like one line, often what I'll say to people about the book is that the basic fundamental principle there is that making conversation should be treated as a fundamentally creative act. And we miss a chance if we're not thinking about not every conversation, but the most important conversations of our lives should be treated like creatively. That's the way we should think about it. And Susan, you know, what's funny is like when you write a book, what you realize is that there's 1,000 whys. What you think there's a single trigger, but there's actually many, many triggers. But I'll tell you the thing that really triggered it, at least my first thought on it, was that back in 2016, I was working with the then Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy of the United States, and he was going to announce an epidemic of isolation and anxiety in America. His premise was that was what was leading to gun violence, that was what leading to suicide, that's what was leading to the opioid addictions, things that we have, as you know, in the US context, that's pretty serious. And he felt like isolation and anxiety would be the thing that would fix like remedying that. He got fired, as most people did. Like, I was emailing him, I got a bounce back. It was like after the elections, and you know, we had a new president, and he was fired by the president, as the president was wont to do. And he turns out he wrote a book proposal at that time on a book called Together, which is all about isolation, and it's kind of like the theory and science behind isolation. I wrote a book proposal that was about creativity and conversation. And his book came out in the spring. Mine's coming out now. And in a way, I feel like our books were kind of call and response, because I was doing work with him to actually design dialogues with the American people. So we were going to do town halls that hopefully would be cathartic and build community in really profound ways. And so that, I think, is the moment that I was like, yeah, we need a book on this topic. But there's many, many, many reasons. So, but that's just one of them. So that's why I wrote it.
I think what is so interesting for me is that you have defined different areas of skills that you need to do to make conversation. And they all begin with a C: the commitment, creating the purpose,
Right.
the creative listening. We'll talk about that in a moment. Having clarity, because there are certain people who word salad, let's say.
Yeah.
Context, constraints change how you can actually have a conversation and possibly change how somebody views something, which is very powerful. And that's
Yeah.
not bullying, and also to create opportunities. So why did you choose those 7?
Well, I mean, there's a lot that's actually in what a book, what publishers want. Like they
Okay.
want, yeah. they would really like 7 C's. So for instance, the clarity chapter was originally called Talk Normal, because the main premise of that is like, when you can talk normal. And I can talk you through that. But actually it became the C's because originally I'd organized the book around what I was calling the creative palette, which would be a palette of different tools you could use. And the 7 C's really worked. And so the palette got lost. So sometimes you remove the structure and you keep what the resulting is, but the 7 C's stayed, and I actually quite like them. It's like, I think that it's like I think they work pretty well. And I think at various moments there are different C's. As you know in the book, it's sort of progressive. Like you kind of like you go along and it gets harder and harder and harder. But at the same time, the same lessons are being taught in different ways. So as you're thinking about commitment, which is how do you commit to a conversation, you're learning new ways to commit in the chapter on constraints. So there's a lot of different ways that the book plays out. So I think it's quite nuanced, but I'm biased.
No, I think it's really clear. And the fact that you have got clarity as one of the chapters and it's very clear is you're walking the talk.
Thank you. Except for I did use the word obfuscates in the first paragraph, and I was like, wait a second, how does the chapter on clarity?
Yeah, but that's for your 2nd edition, isn't it?
Exactly. I was like, my editor could have caught that, but it's okay.
I think that it's very interesting also that you have focused on listening as well as speaking and the actual content of conversations. We spoke before we started this podcast that there are often perhaps courses and challenges, speak like a leader. Yeah. And I find that very, very odd. What's your opinion about that?
Yeah, I find it very troubling, and I'm going to give you I'm going to digress a little bit into the history of where this comes from. So originally the book was actually mostly historical. As you know, there's quite a few historical anecdotes, but at least in the U.S. business context, and I can't speak so much to the U.K. Something really interesting happened in around the 70s, which was that there was a group called EST, which was a kind of self-help organization that was really focused on me enforcing my will on you, Susan. So I basically was like, I'm the leader and you're going to follow me no matter what. And it was this really crazy course where you were locked in a hotel room for the whole weekend. You couldn't use the restroom, whatever. And gradually the people who became those leaders, so I'm going to give you the history and I'm going to tell you what the problems are. It became those leaders, made their employees study the same kind of methodology. And so suddenly this kind of like leadership is about enforcing my will became commonplace in American business context. There's a bunch of other reasons why leaders like enforcing your will has always, I think I talk about in the book, like we prize leadership that's decisive, and decisive by nature says it's quick. That's in the definition of decisive, right? And so, and sometimes being quick isn't the right thing to do as a leader.
Yeah.
And so the problem is, especially now, in the workplace, even more so, is that speaking like a leader and doing the kind of like decisive kind of thing is very akin to what bully culture is. So we see bully culture playing out in government. We see bully culture playing out in the playgrounds. We see bully culture playing out in the business context. So ironically, one of the things that I do, there's 2 things that I really focus on. One is humanizing the leader. So like I really ask when I've got like let's say it's a white woman leader and she's talking to her black and brown staff. It's like my job with working with them is let's humanize both of them. So I'll often ask like the white woman leader and the staff to answer a quick question like, who were you at 12? Because what's interesting when you ask a question like, who were you at 12, is you can be a white woman who basically says, God, I was bullied by my friends. Like I was just like, I felt like I was completely, left out, and 12-year-old girls are pretty hard on each other,
Yes, they are. Yeah.
as you know. And then you can have like a Black woman who's like, at 12 years old, I discovered my hair and I suddenly was like, I grew my hair out and that was the most liberating moment of my life. And so it allows you to kind of see people in a different light and have a different kind of conversation. So that's one of the ways I kind of like undo the kind of this like speak like a leadership bias that we have. But then the other thing is there's a whole chapter on constraints, which is really about rules, which
Yes.
is like setting and resetting the rules. So I'll give you an example. In my life as a creative, I have to critique my teams constantly. Like I have to look at their work and say, is this good? Is this bad? Or I sometimes have to critique them as employees. Like, are you doing well or you're not? If I come in with critique, that's by nature a position of power, right? So yes. I hold the power in that. So one of the things that I do with my people, I have an amazing team right now, is I will often say, before I critique this work, let me hand the rules over to you. You tell me what I can touch and what I can't touch. You tell me what you can hear today and what you can't hear. And then hand it back to me and then I'll do the critique. And so it takes things off the table that they don't want to talk about. So they can be like, you can talk about anything today except for how I was like horrible with such and such yesterday because I was just in a bad mood and I had a really bad moment. And I'm like, okay. Or you can be like, you can talk about anything in the design, but not this one piece because I'm really proud of this piece. So it's like,
it's really interesting.
As a leader, giving the rules over to the people who you work with for a moment is about kind of resetting the playing field. It's actually, yeah, go on.
It's really, really interesting because we all have rules, cultural rules, don't we? I wrote down that certainly in the United Kingdom, there is a real thing about talking about money.
Right.
And politics. So, traditionally we're told that, if we meet people, keep to the weather.
Well, I'm really interested that you brought that up because I have really been encouraging people. In fact, I probably will do a radio broadcast that does focus on money here about why you should talk about money, which is interesting. And especially now, right? So what we know from research is that people who talk to 3 people about financial decisions make better financial decisions than people who talk to 1 person about financial decisions, or certainly to people who don't talk about financial decisions at all. And so I make a habit often, like while we're in deep financial instability.
Yes.
Where if I have a dinner party and there's someone who might be less well off than I am, we're middle level, and then we're with somebody who's like, because we have quite eclectic dinner parties, as you might imagine, given our lives. And also, I think we're on an island that has no COVID, so we've been having socially distanced, but there people are having dinners together. It's very interesting. That we'll talk about money. Like I'm like, let's have 5 minutes and talk about it. And what's great is you get amazing advice from like this really wealthy person who tells you what to do. And we're all making better decisions about it. So that kind of taboo has to go. It's like it makes us safer if we are exploring things together, I think. Does that seem weird? I'm curious.
No, not at all. Because in fact, listeners, I like to hope that you've listened to this other podcast about having financial conversations with Peter Kamogale. He was fantastic. Again, suggesting that the time has come that we really need to be honest about finances and seek help if we do need advice. We shouldn't be ashamed.
I literally was on a call with a friend of mine who's like, I don't think I'm going to go for this job. And I'm like, it's with a very big tech company. And I called her and I was like, listen, I'm just going to be frank. Like 3 years of an influx of money from this company would do you well. And she's like, thank you. And, it's like, and so, I mean, I would never done like a year ago, but it's like, at this point, like, I'm just like, we're going to do it. Right. That was literally, that was a call. I did a 5-minute call with a friend right before this, where I was just like,
That's
think of.
incredible. And I mean, I believe that, and I believe it's the same in the United States. Politics is one of those things that you know, it can ignite a
Yeah,
real emotion.
it's true. I mean, I'll be honest. Like, so I'm doing a session in November 10th. That's about how to have conversations with your Trump or Biden voting neighbors. Because remember, the book is apolitical. I do
Of
have politics,
course.
but it's like,
Yes.
but I don't. I frankly, I do not judge people for
No.
voting. I just don't. And I had a thing the other day where I had somebody, we have property here, and we had somebody bow hunting on the property. And I went down to go just tell them, hey, you got to be okay, careful. And I got close, and their truck had like Trump stickers all over it. And I was like, hey, like if I'm telling a senior ex-president that they're going to have to be on Zoom, and then when they don't want to, then I shouldn't be afraid to talk to this bow hunting Trump voting hunter. So it's like, so I was just like, went up, I introduced him myself, talked to his son, said they could bow hunt till 6, but just watch our dog and stuff like that. And
Yes.
we had a great conversation. Like it was open and free, and like I know his name, he knows my name. Like it's like, and we need to be able to do that. Like it's like, I
You're
mean,
absolutely right, because we're all human beings and we all have the right to an opinion
that's
and
right.
a right to vote as we want to, even if we don't agree with the decision.
And that's true from a religious perspective. That's true for, it's like, I personally am not religious, but I believe in faith. Like I think it's like it's a good thing. Like it's like, and so I think Susan, if we were to get really meta, I think it's our job, like as humans, like our job is to like, well, when I get extreme, I'm like, our job is to love. Like that's what we're supposed to do. But I think at the base level, it's like we're here to explore different people and get to know different people, and that's the joy of living. I think that's maybe the most important work we have to do. So yeah,
And conversations help us do that.
that's totally true. It's like, and when I think you'd asked me earlier about listening. One of the things that actually, I think you did. Am I wrong? It's yeah. It's like that's something that we often forget, is that listening well and listening kind of like with joy is part of a conversation. So it's like, as you know, I'm pretty much against active listening, which is a form of listening that's taught. Yeah, exactly. And the history of active listening is that it came out of Rogerian therapy, which was like Carl Rogers was like an innovator in therapy. Amongst one of his many practices, he decided that there was no universal theory that could actually unlock your psychology. So it's like Freud and Jung couldn't be applied to everybody. And so basically, what he did is he turned questions therapy into questioning. So I would ask you questions, like I'd be like, go on, or why did you feel that way, or what do you think was the root of, like, and so I wouldn't give you any advice, I would just kind of like ask. And what that did is it helped you unlock your psychological issue. So a very good strong, I mean, that's kind of the basis of what we think therapeutic practice is today. My therapist is a bit more bossy, which I like, but but she's like, no, you're gonna call your mother, and I'm like, okay. But what's interesting is that got adopted and brought into HR, human resources in companies.
Yes.
And now it's a way for us to be like, oh, you have a workplace complaint? Okay, go on. Tell me. Well, what about what that person said made you feel that way? And that's a way of me like encouraging you to talk and feel like maybe you're feeling better, but I'm not listening at all. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
there's no listening that's happening. I'm just like, I'm hearing. And so the book is really focused on the idea of creative listening, which is that listening you should have joy. Like I should be able to respond when you say something, Susan, that I'm interested in, or um, I should ask for a secret. I love secrets, because like secret, like not tweets. Tweets are pretty sucky. It's like but like a little secret is like the perfectly tuned story. It's like a 6-word or 10-word story that gets your attention. And you probably, I don't know if you read, but there's like a whole section about how to tell a 30-second illuminating story about yourself.
No, Stories are so important, aren't they? I'm delivering a virtual workshop on Thursday about that. So just tweaking my content, you know, it from a neuroscientific point of view, it's just so powerful.
Well, so take a look at there's a 2-page chapter on illuminations, and it's basically it's how to tell the perfect 20-second story. Um, and do you want me to tell you about it?
Go on, please, you know, but I'm sure everybody's really interested in this.
Okay, so let me. So I call this the chapter Illuminations because it's actually taken from medieval manuscripts, like the little drawings that were alongside.
Oh yes, yeah.
Where that sometimes would help illuminate what was in the text, and sometimes would just distract you from the text, but they were still like these kind of little things. And so I have the chapter open because it's one of my favorite sections. And I'll start by telling you a story. So when I was a child, I was raised by my great grandmother, and my great grandmother was a steel worker by night. She was a foreman in the steel mills, and she was a farmer during the day. And when I was a child, she would sit and tell me stories. And my favorite story of hers that I would always ask her to tell me over and over again is one night she came home from the steel mill. She was exhausted. She didn't think she could go on. Her phrase was just a few more days to tote the weary load. She always wanted to just be like, let me lay down my toil. And suddenly, as she's walking down the driveway to the farm, she sees something come through the sky closer and closer and closer. It's dressed in blue, and it gets close, and it's Jesus, and he winks at her, and then she had the strength to go on and do with her day. So that to me is the perfect illumination. And I'll tell you, I'll call it the 4 things. It's really short. Like I think that probably was like 30 seconds, maybe a little more because I gave you more context about my grandmother, right? It suggests an emotional response. Like I tell that story and I still get a little bit of a shiver, like because it's like I'm like you can feel the toil, you can feel the toil, you can feel like the kind of the release of having like being whatever. Um, it 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 should stop where the story starts. So the whole story goes on from it. Like it's like, so what about that? Like, how did she go on? What was the rest of her life?
Yeah.
It's the kind of like it's the fairy tale ending that isn't the fairy tale ending. It's like let's hear what would happen afterwards. But it's like just gives you there, and it should have a twist that reveals. So we love. I mean, you guys, you're the paradigm of this, like from like Roald Dahl to Dark Mirror, whether we love Roald Dahl's politics or not. It's like the English are phenomenal at kind of crafting like surprising twists at the end of their stories. You're so good at it. But the twist reveals something. Like they're like, so like in this twist, you suddenly know my grandmother's a person of faith. And you know that Jesus was actually the thing that kind of moved her forward. So those are the 4 principles I use. And you can even do it in like 6 words if you want. So play around with it. Like it's kind of an interesting little exercise to do.
Oh, that would be great because I do the 6-word story, which is wonderful.
Totally. It's like I now feel like I'm like yeah, it's like I'm doing like I do these little 6-word stories where I'm just kind of like we're looking younger, moved to an island and just got a big shipment of dirt, like which makes it sound like it's a Dracula, but it's not. It's just like so it's like what are like the little like twisty stories you can tell like in a couple words, but it's been sort of fun. That's my Instagram is like I'm just doing only really short twisty stories right now, so that's been the fun.
Oh, fantastic! That's what is your Instagram? How much? Just in case anybody wants to follow you.
It's FD Brave, so it's FDBRAVE. So my initials, and that's because like I sort of believe that to have hard conversations, it takes a little bit of courage to do that.
It does. Which brings me on. You talked about giving feedback, and I think that is an example of a brave conversation, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And again, giving feedback is an example where, again, I ask people to set the rules for how the feedback's going to happen. Like it's like you kind of you do an exchange around it, and there's quite a few. This is not based on me. This is neuroscience. Like you don't give feedback at the end of the day. Like it's like you don't give feedback just before the weekend. It's like give feedback in the morning when people are kind of like fresh and able. Or you can, if you want, give feedback around 5, 6 p.m. if you do it in a kind of cocktail setting, because people start to kind of wake up again. So there's a lot of kind of like neuroscience about when in the day you should be
Oh,
giving feedback.
yes. Yeah, yeah. I
And
don't, oh, sorry.
go on, please.
I don't know if you know that I'm a former opera singer. And when I was at music college, my teacher, if I was doing a recital, and I would literally be coming off the stage and she'd be waving a list of 30 things as I walked off the stage. So, from a neuroscientific point of view, the worst time. All right, we've got these things, that you breathed in the wrong place there. Your double T was too long, and it was all of that stuff rather than, well done, we'll talk about that on Monday.
I know. Well, so what's so funny? First of all, that's amazing that you're an opera singer. I have a great story about a woman who sang to fix a meeting that went wrong. But maybe I'll tell you. But what's interesting is that same as an architect, architecture critiques are like vicious. They're like I mean, fellow students. Yeah, they would actually drug themselves in order to get through their critiques.
It's a bitch fest.
And I was like, I'm not having it. Like as a student, I was like, you guys, like you go down this path, and I'm walking out, because I was like, I don't, and that's why I started setting really strong rules. Like with my design teams, I'm like, we're gonna have rules of critique, because I'm not gonna be a bitch to you the whole time. Like it's like I don't want that to be the dynamic that we have. But it's amazing if you're opera. I was in a meeting that went terribly awry. And a friend of mine, Amelia Winger Bearskin, her mother was indigenous storyteller, like a Native American upstate New York. Her father was an IBM executive, but and she was an opera singer. And the meeting was going terribly, and she raised her hand and she was like, "Excuse me, but can I say something?" And everyone was like, "Of course you can say something." And she stood up and she sang a lullaby that she had written for her son. And lullabies are actually about endings and the potential of death and the potential of kind of rebirth. And it's like they're basically telling your child, I think I'll see you in the morning, but we may not see you in the morning. And so they're a reminder of mortality. And it just like woke that group up. Like they were like, oh wait, time is short. We don't have time to be like having this. We need to just get to it. So just an amazing moment. That's in the book, but it's like an amazing little moment where being an opera singer and having a lullaby up your sleeves was really helpful. So
yeah, as one does. now getting back to the book and also conversations, I'm sure that there are going to be people listening today that think, are the differences between genders and also generations with conversation? How can you frame things so that you really engage with different groups?
And there are, and at the same time, I also want to be cautionary about assuming where differences exist. So one of the things that actually makes a bad conversation is that we assume there's difference when in fact there might not be. So I do want to be, that's how the whole book is. I'm like, think about this, but maybe think the opposite. Like it's like, it's like.
Yeah, I think you've made a good point, because I know that there are some people that try and categorize people into either introverts or extroverts, or these 4 particular personality types, or the Myers-Briggs stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. But at the same time, it's like, for instance, I wrote about humor originally because I was going to write about the role of the court jester, because as you know, court jesters were pretty they weren't great jobs, right? Like a lot of them got killed because like you can make fun of the kings only so much before like they're going to kill you. And it's like, and so I was going to write about humor and the role of like what comedy can do, because a lot of people now take their news in through humor, as opposed to watching like straight news. They'll watch like humorous news. But one of the things that made me that dissuaded me is that there's a lot of psychological research about the ways that men use humor versus the way women use humor.
Yes.
And so I didn't want to kind of say this is a good thing if, the reality was like, if I make a joke or kind of like sometimes I'll tease somebody to basically be like, as a way of doing critique, like I'll be like, oh, okay, I said, give me 2 ideas, you gave me 10 and took up the whole meeting. And that's okay because my team trusts me, but you have to be really careful with the way
Yes.
you do humor.
Yeah.
And because and it's very gendered, it's like it's a really interesting context. So yes, I mean there are differences, but again, the big thing is like, as like in the book, I talk about my favorite movie, Harold and Maude, where Harold turns to Maud. Maud's an 85-year-old woman who can talk to anybody, or 80-year-old woman who can talk to anybody. And he's like, Maud, how do you do it? Harold's like 24 or whatever, and they're in a relationship. He's like, how do you do this? And she's like, they're my species. People are my species, and so and because she can talk across generations. And I've had a lot of situations where I worked with a newsroom once where their assumption was the divide was generational. And when we got through the conversation, we realized it wasn't generational. And in fact, there was a lot of agreement that was there was assumed a generational difference. So we have to be really thoughtful about that. But yes, there are differences, and we have to also kind of plan for it at the same time.
I suppose by listening and watching and being aware, so that you can really make the most of talking to anybody with respect.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's funny because it's like with the newsroom, what I did was I did a divine reading. So divine, it's like lectio divinio. It's basically, I asked them to choose an article that their paper had written and read it 4 ways. Like read like it's like, what about this like have you seen in your life? What is this like mythologically? And then the third was like, what does this tell me we should do? And then the fourth thing was, what do we all agree on, or what can we all agree on? And they ended up choosing the same 3 stories. I mean, they could have chosen thousands and thousands of stories. That whole newsroom chose the same 3 stories, and they had huge realizations about what they believed the paper needed to do to go forward with that. So there's tools. I mean, Lectio Divinio is in the book, and it's pretty cool. Like obviously it's secularized, but it's a really interesting tool.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, we have all been forced to communicate far more virtually. And right. I know that in the book, there it is almost right at the end, you are starting to discuss that. Do you have any tips for maintaining that good conversation style in a virtual context?
I do. And so the thing is that, by the way, it was really funny. Like a lot of books got halted. Mine didn't get halted during the pandemic. And then my publisher was like, you have to add a chapter, and you have an afternoon. So I wrote a chapter like in an afternoon that's on how to have the hardest conversations of your life during a pandemic by Zoom. And it's also, frankly, it's been what my team has been using as the basis of all of their work. And that's how we've actually been able to bond. And I'll give you a couple of principles, which is that, as you know, the first chapter is commit. And the idea is that you commit to the conversations that you're invested in. But if there's something you're not invested in, don't commit. So that means literally don't go. And that's especially important now with like our lives being overscheduled. Like take the opportunity to be like, if I'm not into this, I'm not gonna go. However, the kind of double side of that though is if you're the only voice of difference in that Zoom, so if you're the only Black woman, or you're the only woman, or you're the only gay man, or whatever, it's like, or whatever, the only unionized employee or whatever, it's like you need to try to be in that room, and you need to kind of figure out how you're going to do that. So that's one. I do a lot. I basically, with my team, I have a wild card day, which is like, you don't want to show up, or if you want to show up and just cry, that's fine. We can do that. Like, it's like, and that's been really helpful to kind of bonding the team in a significant way. I'm like, asynchronous can feel like a conversation. Like I talk about how like in the book, like my story coach, who's also my editor, we would work in Google Docs. And there was one point where we got so comfortable with the conversations in Google Docs that I remember at some point he's like he put a comment on one of the texts, and he's like there's something wrong with your brain. And I was like, I thought that was the funniest thing ever, and that's something he would totally say to me and whatever. But it felt like it was a good dialogue that we're having through Google Docs. So asynchronous works. And then like if we were doing a lecture right now, my husband would pop in at some point and bring me a glass of wine or something like, and I would introduce the crowd to my husband and ask him to say I love you to them. And that's what I call designing human in. So I'm literally putting like, or some people call it husband as prop, but it's like, it's a way for me to sort of say, hey, like sometimes if it's feeling inhuman, you have to play up the humanness, you know?
Yes, you do. Yes.
Yeah. And then there's some people they're trying to design human out because they've got a baby on their lap their entire time. And like, I get that too, you know, but I'm sort of like in this piece that just came out on Monday. And I basically like, just have to have a lot of goodwill towards the people who are on these calls right now. Cause it's like, it's a hard time, you know,
Yeah,
it's just,
absolutely. I mean, I do not mind if a cat crosses the
no,
street and things. It's as
yeah,
it is. There's
it's,
no point.
and you know, it's actually why I've sort of, you know, a lot of people will hide their backgrounds, and I'm like, think about not doing that. Like, it's okay for us to see us in context. Like, I was giving lectures in the spring where there'd be somebody from Indonesia who was in bed, like covering their heads with a sheet so they could actually watch the lecture. And I was like, I was thankful to see that. And, you
Oh,
know,
absolute. What a privilege for you to have somebody really pushing
yeah. And so
their work.
I feel like it's okay to see like, you know, people where they are. Like
Yes,
it's important to do that. So anyway, in a lot of ways, you're gonna think this is crazy. In a lot of ways, I think we can have better conversations now.
I would agree.
Isn't that strange?
Yeah. When you see CEOs and the dog arrives,
Yeah,
and in the past they've been separate, perhaps in the way that they're located or viewed within an organization, and all of a sudden you
yeah.
see them in their home, the dog, and perhaps a child is shouting across the room.
Yeah, and by the way, let's also remember that when a dog arrives or a child arrives, oxytocin, which is like the love
Yes,
hormone, is triggered in our brain. So we're actually we're like, so that's why sometimes I'll purposely put my dog in the background because she's really cute, just to like trigger the oxytocin on the other side. So there's a lot of different benefits around this
yes,
that we need to think about. So yeah, I agree. I'm amazed. I mean, the other thing I'm seeing a lot of is people who couldn't come to meetings, who were kept out, are now being allowed in because
yeah,
like, and so there's new faces and new voices and new possibilities of action
yeah.
that weren't there.
New opportunities for those people to raise their profile.
Exactly. It's like, so I'm
Really
just like,
exciting.
I really, I'm surprised by all the good things that are
Yes.
happening for this. So
Now, one of the things that I always ask guests is 3 top tips. Now, from your context, from your point of view, it's 3 top tips that you can share with all of us about good conversations.
okay, I'm gonna start with my favorite one, which is, if you can't talk, then make together. So, and that's just like, that is my top tip, which is like, you can't talk to your Brexit voting or non-Brexit voting, you know, grandparents, or you know, whatever it is, then don't, like, just go make with them. So go make banana bread, or go make, you know, scones, or like, I'm trying to make it. It's like I'm trying to make it as like as British as I can think of. Like
Oh, we've got international audience
I
here.
know, I'm, you know, I really miss cheddar and onions tea sandwiches, like those.
Oh, yes.
Oh my God, I just got so hungry thinking about that. I'm sorry. I'm gonna make that for lunch. I think I've got cheddar and some onions I can do that with. But so that's the number one thing. And I think you understand the reasoning behind that. It's just that it's like being together and doing something together serves the purpose of kind of like of gathering,
Yeah.
and you know, and it does, that does things. I think I got asked the question, what happens to somebody when somebody like won't talk to you or hates you, or says they hate you, is, and that's where I came up with the notion that it's like, commit to the conversations or don't. You know, so it's
Yeah.
like, so commit, but if you commit, you're committing to the person on the conversation, understanding the person, you're holding your values a little bit kind of behind, you know, it's like, and you can commit for 5 minutes, Like you can actually name how long you're going to commit. Like it's like, but those that's something that I think is really, it's critical. And like I said, if you can't, don't. Some of the things that make conversations bad are that you're not really committed to the conversation, or you're not really committed to the institution, but you stay in there anyway. And so you're basically just causing trouble for somebody. You know, it's like as opposed to letting them advance. I'm on a lot of boards, and there's people who like clearly don't believe in the institution who are on the board, and they're just there as a naysayer. And I'm like, just get off the board.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Stop
clear.
wasting our time.
Yeah. So that's the second one. And then I think the third one that we talked about is, there's so many, but like, is ask for a story. So if you really want to get to know somebody, ask for a story, give them guidelines on how to tell a good story. So if somebody's like, when I go home at the end of the day, or like go into the kitchen and I talk for 3 hours to my husband, that's not a story. That's me venting. Or anytime somebody has to be like, let me go back till when I was 12. Or when they have like narratives within narratives within narratives, like those aren't stories. That's just life. And you're telling me life. You know, it's like, but when you ask for a story, like I had somebody over recently who's suffering from prostate cancer, like, and he probably fatal prostate cancer. And I basically was like, tell me a 20-second story of the last time you had fun in the oncology ward. And he loved that. And he told me the funniest story. And it was like 30 seconds and it was like perfect. And so you can break through on conversations you don't think you could have, like what it's like to feel like you're dying, by kind of asking the right kind of story around it. So don't be afraid, but you need to help people do it. Like give them a prompt. Like don't just say, oh, what's it like to have cancer? You know, that's like that doesn't really get you much. Right.
Yeah.
So those are 3 of the top tips, but the book is like,
oh, absolutely. It's a sort of top tips. It's wall to wall, or cover to cover, top tips. So Fred, how can people either get in contact with you or, more importantly, purchase the book?
So they can go to my website, makingconversation.com. And there's a couple things. They can subscribe to my newsletter. I'm building a curriculum. So there's going to be like a little WhatsApp curriculum so that people will get like a 30-second thing every morning that we're working on right now. Through that, there's all the approved booksellers you can buy independently. You can buy from like big chains that you like globally, whatever you like. Yeah. And it's really important, I will say, for people to buy the book, because that's how printing is happening right now. Like otherwise books aren't getting printed. And really, like, all my social media is there. So it's like any ways that you can connect. But I think I don't know, Susan, you read it. It's kind of an easy book to read. It's
very, very easy to read. And, you know, everybody, what I'll do is that I'll make sure in the notes for this podcast, all of Fred's social media details and a link to the book, information on the book.
I took a picture, by the
way. Have you got a photo?
I got a photo. Yeah.
Send it to me.
I will, definitely.
And honestly, it is full of really, really good content. And I know that lots of you let me know how you're getting on after particular episodes. I've got this feeling, just got this feeling in me, that this is going to be of huge value to you. So please look Fred out.
I really appreciate it, Susan. And it was a joy. Like I said, like there's some podcasts where I'm like, how am I going to do this? This one I was just like, oh, this is going to be so much fun. It's like, it's going to be great.
Fantastic. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time. Keep in contact, and listeners, get in contact with Fred.
Yeah. And then just keep on doing your great work. I mean,
Thank you very much. Oh, so until next time, remember, everyone, I really appreciate your feedback on particular podcast episodes. Remember to subscribe, and also give me a testimonial, because this all helps spread the word. So until next time, this is Susan Heaton-Wright from Superstar Communicator. You have been listening to the Superstar Communicator podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and review the podcast on iTunes and on apps. Please contact us if you want to discuss any topic, could suggest a topic for us to include, or a guest who could come onto the podcast. Go to superstarcommunicator.com.